It's not too bad. Triangles are the most stable structures in engineering. So, yeah. So you know, what happens when you cross your legs like that? Your ability to actually move your hip joints independently, out the window, more or less. Yeah, you felt that yesterday? So really, even though I'm asking you to tilt your legs, what you're really moving across the ground is your pelvis. And then remember, I asked you to do this. And isn't it interesting? Triangle, triangle. And the same thing here. As long as you don't bend the elbows, and this is the tricky part. Remember I said, could you please maintain the integrity of the triangle? That means not actually deforming the base so that it becomes more like a sack than a triangle, yes? Because you can just take that and it becomes rounded. So, yeah, so you can do that, and you see that the base of the triangle has now become bowed. Yeah? So maintaining the integrity of the triangle does the same thing with the chest. You can't independently move the shoulders or very much the shoulder girdle, although the shoulder girdle will slide. And therefore, what the mass of the body that you're addressing is actually the thorax. Yeah, that's it. That's right. That's right. So, and then we've got a third mass, which I can just ask you to roll directly because it's apart. I have wired up the jaw. Apart from the jaw, the head is the head. It rolls en masse anyway because it's all joined together. So what we're dealing with here is the three major central masses of the body. The mass of the pelvis, the mass of the thorax, and the mass of the head. And then we added one more component. Let's make them orange. Yeah. We added one more component, and in their own right, they're like about the size of peaches, eyeballs. They have a weight, peaches. Yeah, they're quite big. Yeah. So you get your sense of orientation. I'm looking at you. Yep. You. Gives you an idea, yeah? So the other thing that we were doing is we were doing this, remember? So that is like, and can you see that just having those little sticks sticking out there gives you a sense of where those orbs are actually going, how they're rolling in your head? Yeah. So you're dealing in this lesson with four masses. The huge mass of the pelvis here, lots of muscle, lots of viscera there. The huge mass of the rib cage, the ribs, the heart, the liver's over here, stomach's over here, the mass of the head, 6 kilos, and then the mass of the eyes. And so you have these four distinct parts, each movable relative to the other. Because the eyes can move in the sockets of the head. The thorax can move because of the flexibility of the spine. The pelvis can move because of the flexibility of the spine. And the head can move because of the flexibility of the spine. And then what did we do? We explored various combinations of movement. So this is what we did. Yeah. So we did the permutational. We didn't actually do all 24 variations, by the way. It felt like it, yeah. Yeah, but we didn't do that. We didn't do 24 variations because in mathematics, if this is the set of 4, yeah, so you have a set of 4 parts or masses in this that can be arranged in particular combinations. And the mathematics is 1, the eyes, times 2, the head, times 3, and you're a mathematician. Is this true? You're reflecting, okay. Yeah. 3, the chest, and 4, the fourth one is the pelvis. So you get 1 times 2 times 3 times 4. That's 24 different combinations that these parts can be relative to each other. And what's relative? Depends what you want to set up. relative to their position to the midline or relative to tilting to the floor. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, it's pretty. If you just did that as an exploration alone with no structure to it, I will guarantee you your image, self-image, your representation of yourself on your cortex will have changed. If you're actually paying attention to the feeling of it, wow, that's really going to change. And if somewhere in those combinations, suddenly you go, wow, you know, I do this in this and this activity, and all of a sudden that combination is recognized and as having salience, meaning, whoa, then your brain really goes, conk. So that's abstract. It's very abstract. But you can get to a very meaningful place in terms of your experience and what's meaningful for you in your life. Yeah, makes sense? I would say that Feldenkrais kind of thought about it like this. Being a mathematician and an engineer, yeah, he would think in terms of Rubik's Cubes. You know those crazy Rubik's Cubes that we used to have and all those squares that moved around and I could never solve? Yeah. Ah, well. Ah, did you? Ah, shit. Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah, so you see, it's possible to work out heuristics, yeah, of how to work things out. Yeah. So, yeah, we'll return to this lesson either late this afternoon or tomorrow, and then we'll look at how can you roll completely onto the side without falling. Without falling. Yeah, without falling. So what is the particular combination of things that you need to do without falling? And of course, it requires more than these 4 parts, but that's what comes. So that's kind of the very kind of simple mathematical structure that lies within that lesson that you just did. But notice when you pay attention, it's a whole different world in there. Yeah? Remember that talk I gave in that first week about experience and things outside of yourself, objective experience? This is, that's subjective. That's outside of yourself. It has no meaning. But when you start to do it, all those experiences come out. I'm able, oh, this is fun, whatever, they come forward. So that's the first thing that I wanted to cover. So let's move on to the second thing. Whoever's closest to you, could you form a pair? And in your pair, could you take, one person take an orange one person take a white one, and pass the bucket on? I think there should be enough. I hope there'll be enough for all of us. Yeah. I oversupplied, I think. If not, we can share. No, but there'll be enough. I'm just looking at the visiting teachers. So in your pair, one of you should have an orange one and one of you should have a white one. And if I can borrow one of your, if I could borrow one of your orange ones, Maya, thank you. So this is the second activity, but it has 2 parts to it. So first part, yesterday we were talking about, and this is the point that Philippa raised, yeah? This distinction between turning, rotating, spinning, rolling. It's a really important distinction to make. And I have to say, when you read some of the Feldenkrais transcripts, sometimes as a, I won't even say second language speaker, it is 4th language. English is his 4th, 5th, 6th language. Yeah, it was the last language he learned. He's not too good on the distinctions sometimes, although sometimes he fires off at the class for not understanding what he's saying. So, don't you know? So, listen carefully. So, if you put your ball on the floor and hold the end of the stick and place your hand on the floor like so, make sure you have the ability to twiddle the stick. Now, if you leave the ball in contact with the floor and turn your stick, notice how it rolls left and right. But notice, if you look at it carefully, if you do a nice bit of geometry and put the ball on a line, you can see there's black lines in the carpet. That's why we hired this room. No, there's black lines of the carpet. Now, notice, as you roll the ball, can you see how it goes below the black line and then returns to it? It rolls in an arc. This object that you're spinning at the end of the stick, you're actually not spinning it, turning it at the end of the stick, you're actually not turning it, you're actually rolling it. This object at the end of your stick is rolling on the floor. It's changing its position moment by moment. So a different part of the ball is touching a different part of the floor at any time. Does that can you see that? Yeah. Now, do something else. So now, still hold your stick, but now put your fingers and your index finger and the thumb pretty close to the ball at the top so that there's no possibility of rolling. And now just simply spin the stick. And what you'll see, depending on how your ball has been inserted onto the stick, you'll see the ball staying in place. Can you see that? But notice it's staying in place. It's touching the same part of the carpet, but a different part of the ball is touching at a different time. That is spinning. Then blame the maker. It's bad engineering. Yeah? So can you see the distinction? Oh, yeah. This is where I'm applying the power down the bottom, yes? I held it firmly and I applied. Oh, okay. So let's go back. And I think this is worth repeating because this distinction's really important in ATM. You're trying to communicate a particular idea, so it's really important. So if you hold the end of the stick like you held it, where are you supplying the power? At your fingertips. Yeah, so you're supplying the power at the fingertips, and you're just keeping that index finger where it is, and look, the thing rolls on the ground. Yeah. But now, still supply the power with underneath fingers, but make an axis. So now it's this one in this hand, it's just going to turn between these two fingers, and I think that's where the confusion was. Yes. So now supply power, the same sort of power, you're still twiddling the end of the stick, but notice now that the ball spins. And that's very different. Rolls. Yeah. So language being the animal it is, there are different words for spinning and there are different words for rolling. So you could say spinning is a kind of turning, and traveling is a kind of rolling. Never mind. Yeah, like this. It's turning. The earth is turning. But it is spinning. Yeah. Yeah. Does that make sense? Or have I confused you now to the nth degree? And that means I can yell at you. Yeah. Yeah. You get to keep it. It's my gift to you. A stick and a ping pong ball. Now, yeah. Could you hold it to the end? You're oscillating. Okay, sure. We can refine that even further. But the thing that I really want you to get, the thing that I really want you to get is this difference between this object rolling on the ground and it actually moves across the ground. And because it's attached to the end of a stick, it makes an arc on the ground. The same thing happens with your head. So this is where you actually need to come closer so that you can really see. So you've actually done this. You've actually experienced it with this. Remember this? So when you did this, first thing this week, the tendency in this movement, eventually where you get to, is you literally turn your head around an axis. Yes? However, when you're lying on the ground and then the friction of the floor and the weight of your head, to actually turn your head around this axis is a bit more tricky because it's not free in space anymore. Yeah? So then you have to free yourself from the friction, you have to lift the head, and then your sense of what your longitudinal axis is, it's a little bit skew-if. Yeah? So rather than turn the head, which would be this, you see how if that's the midline, it stays more or less in the midline. What we tend to do on the floor, it travels left and it travels right. And one ear gets closer to one shoulder, depending on how tight your arc is. Yeah? Or for some people, when they turn their head goes up and their head goes up. There's all sorts of different ways. But remember, this part of the spine is really flexible. So the options are big, but so there's these two different ways. Your head could stay in place and you just go, or your head could go. You see the difference there? Yeah. So rotating is a nice word. Rotating, rolling, the two R's. Rotating, rolling. Okay. Now, why did I have an orange one and why don't I have a white one? Now, so, oh yeah, how are we going? Oh, I got 20 minutes. Okay, so here's the job. One of you has a white one of you has an orange one. Person with the white ball, could you just hold the stick and have the white ball up? Yep. Kojak, for those of you who are of my vintage. Don't you remember Kojak always sucked that little choppa chop? Oh, where are your memories? Where are your grey cells? So there you are. Now, the other person has the orange ball. Other person, could you have your stick facing the ceiling and try to balance your orange ball on the white ball? Yeah, so you hold the stick, you gently lower the orange ball towards the white ball, and then you do that Frankenstein thing. Ha ha ha, live. No, you, yeah. Then can you find a point where you could let go of the stick and it would just stay there? Such torture, darlings. Can you find that point? Yeah, but you know, there's a trick to that. Ideally, this is, yeah. The person with the white stick holds the stick so the white ball is facing the ceiling. The person with the orange ball holds the stick so that the ball is facing the ground, and then you lower the orange ball to the white ball, you make contact, and then you go, is it going to balance here? Is it going to balance here? And you'll quickly discover that life is frustrating. That's right. Okay. have you proven to yourself that without a doubt that two curvy bits cannot balance on each other? Excellent. Empirical study, check. All right. So how does this relate to anatomy? But first, before I tell you that, a quick story. You know, my first training in a somatic method was based on the work of Mabel Todd, who lived in the early 1920s. Most of the creative work was done then. However, she lived to, I think she died in the 1950s. Was that right? 50s or so? Anyway, she had her own problems. Most of these people that created somatic systems had her own problems. I think she fell off a horse or something like that, injured her back. And she tried to find a recovery. And her particular way of finding that recovery was to use imagery. Now, I've jumped a lot of steps. Yeah? She would imagine the internal workings, the internal mechanisms of her body moving in certain directions, in certain relationships to each other, and all that information. No. Okay. That's my timer going, I have 10 minutes left. Yeah. It's true. You want to see? I got proof. Look. See? Okay. I can supply cake tomorrow. It's all right. So she used a very particular knowledge of anatomy where she had a dynamic representation of her anatomy in mind or figurative images, and she would literally just lie on the floor and imagine these parts of herself moving relative to each other in certain directions, and change occurs. Change occurs. Now, in the 1930s, do you know how radical that idea was? And coming from a woman? Holy moly. Mabel Todd. No, just leave it. Just leave it. So it was quite radical. And she went into the educational department of Columbia University in Manhattan, New York. And she kept on. And her work became, well, I'm not saying institutionalized, but she opened a studio. She trained teachers. She developed a hands-on way of working with people. And she developed a group way of working with people. So she had a hands-on methodology, which not a lot of people know about. A lot of people think, oh, Mabel Todd, it's all imagery and group work. Well, actually, no. But anyway, that's an aside. So, yeah, she fell from a horse and injured her back. So you can't help yourself. I can't help but answer. Man. So this way of using objects to represent ideas as a schema, just as something that's quite abstracted and not so complicated as what's in there, because it's complicated in there. It just brings you back to a very single, simple idea that you can play with, get an understanding for, and then work with it a little bit. Yeah, hold. So you've just found out that curved surfaces do not balance on each other. And yesterday, Jenny said, imagine those curved surfaces in your body and they're slippery. So if you coated those balls with a little bit of, virgin olive oil and then try to balance them, you'd have an even harder time. Not only would you get rolling, you'd get slippage. No. So how do these things get held together? Why did this pop into my mind? Why am I presenting this to you today? Because it's important. Because you see, if you have an arm up in the air like that, unless there's something working, what you've got is a whole collection of curved surfaces that are just dying to fall off each other. No, let me fall. Well, in outer space, they wouldn't. But in the gravitational field, they will. You let go. If you let go, things fall. That's it. Now, having said that, I told you it's more complicated than it is. So let's make it more complicated, shall we? could you take a elastic band, 2 different colors, sprinkle, yeah, 2 different colors, and now you're only allowed 2 elastic bands. That's the constraint. You're allowed 2 elastic bands, and could you use those 2 elastic bands to bring those 2 balls into contact so that you could have one above the other and they don't fall over? One between each of you. So 1 for one person, 1 for the other, 2 between you. So the task is use those 2 elastic bands so that one person could hold a stick and the other ball will balance on top. Did you guys get elastic bands up there? Okay. Well, you know, it took me 45 minutes to work it out last night. 45 minutes. Yeah, last night was the first time I ever did it. That's okay. Evolution took a couple of 100,000 years. 45 minutes is pretty good. You did it? And partly wrong. I know there's a distinction between permutations and combinations. And now one of the most difficult tasks for any teacher, class. No. Stop the class when they're interested. That's one of the most difficult things to do. Whoa. Yeah. Okay. So could one of you hold a stick and prove to everybody else that the thing can stand and you have created some form of stability? Now, if you have a look at each other's solutions, this is really, yeah. If you look at each other's solutions, there's a very similar solution in each case. There's a band on an opposite side. And in some cases, there's 4 bands on the 4 quadrants of the sphere. Can you see that? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay. So now that you've done that, we're in a fantastic position to talk about the very last bit, which is this guy here. The hip joint, which is a ball and socket joint. We'll leave the shoulder joint for another time because that's far more complex. This is far more straightforward. You know, when you have a spherical object like you just found, trying to rest in a cup, it can go any direction, just like your stick fell off in any direction. So for you to be able to control that in the 4 cardinal directions, front, back, left, right, because you can't stick your hip joint up through to your head. Just can't do it. No, don't want to do that either. So for you to control this movement, forward, backwards, this way and this way, you have to have muscles located on one side. You have to have muscles located on the other side. You have to have muscles located on the front, and you need to have muscles located on the back. And that's the solution you've just come up with. That's the only way you can control a ball and socket joint. You have to have some sort of regulation from the 4 directions it can possibly move in. And unless you have that, there are actually other ones, but I won't mention those because your leg can also rotate. So you have some muscles that will turn the leg in, and you have some muscles that will turn the leg out. Yeah? So really, I should have given you another elastic band. But that's all right. So can you see that if you set up a problem, i.e. how can you join these things together, and I only give you 2 items, a certain solution appears. It's the same, kind of a similar situation that happens in ATM. You set up a motor problem. You set up a motor problem, it's a task, and you only have a certain set of possibilities. And after a while, you all start to solve the problem in a similar way, but differently. And the correct mathematics for this that I mentioned to you is not as simple as that, because as I said, Tamara is actually a mathematician. And I always defer to someone in the field.
Okay. Just hold it. All right, so if we cross his legs again, the mathematics is actually, in a way, it gives us less options than 24, but in a way, it could be more. So basically, there's 2 choices. The legs can stay in neutral, or they can be turned to the right, let's say. So then, associated with that, you've got 2 choices for the arms. They can be either turned to the right or stay in the middle. So you've got, and each one can go, you can have, in fact, you've got 4 here, so you multiply them because there's two that's here and here, and regardless of that, this one can be here and here. And then you've got the head, which also has two choices, so it can go left and right. So that's 2 by 2 by 2, which is 8, and the eyes can go left and right, 2 by 2, which is 16. Of course, they could also go to the left if you want to count that, or any number of options in between, or stay in the middle. So if you count any options in between, well, it's infinite. But if you if you just count the simplified, so just there or there, then it's 2 by 2 by 2 by 2, which is 16. No, 2 by 2 by 2, 2 to the power of 4, 16. So it's not 24, but it's close. So yeah. Yeah, so in fact, if you just think of up and to the right, then it's 16. If you count going to the left, which you could do because you can then take this to the right, that's, you've got 3 choices, so 3 by 3 by 3 by 3 is 81. So that's not counting in the middle, yeah, yeah.
So just to finish up, so that means if you take these, this set of 4, you can do possibly in each one.
With these set of 4, yes. We're going to try them out. See how many I can actually do. Okay.
So I said I'd leave some time for questions. So let's see. Can I cap it at, say, 10, maybe 15? Yes? So anything that's directly related to what we've done here, whether it be the permutations and combinations or the joints or the hip joint, anything related to that. And then should there be another question outside of that, when we're covered, we'll do that. So. Yes, okay. Oh, the orange box is flying your way. That's, yep.
When we're standing, what you were saying is that the head would spin. Just spin.
It can spin, but there's nothing for it to roll on.
You wouldn't roll.
No.
In standing.
But it becomes complicated because literally, you know, you're not, someone mentioned the word top yesterday, and you see these notion of mechanical axes are just these abstract concepts. This notion that so if you take, for an example, the Earth is spinning, and they say it's got an axis. I don't know, when those astronauts took a picture of the Earth from outer space, I saw no axis. So what is this thing called an axis? It's the place around which most of the mass moves, and that axis is the place where there is no movement or hardly any movement. So if you spin your head around this axis, this imaginary axis is not moving in space, it stays where it is. But as soon as I deviate my head to the left, now the axis is off. Now I have this axis passing through here and a different axis passing through here. Now I have several axes. That's where it gets complicated. Yeah? And that's why biomechanicists just love the day when they could put all of that stuff on computers and just attach things and the computer does all the crunching. Because calculating all those different angles of rotation, 81 possibilities? Yeah, I think a couple of thousand. Yeah, it really gets complicated. And then if you start to think of all the different angles and curves in the joints and how the bones actually move around there, it's kind of, yeah. So we're looking at the resultant. We're looking at what we can visually see the head doing, but if you zoom in on any particular joint, it's doing something completely different. So a description is just that. It's just a useful way of talking about something that enables us to communicate something essential, but the actual detail is far more complex. Yeah. So that would be the difference between doing this. Did you do this with Susan, the wobbling of the lips, the invariance, you know?
Oh, yeah, we did that.
Yeah? Yeah? Did you do that? And did you do this one too?
Yeah.
Yeah? Did you do this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Yeah, so you know that rotating the head this way is a lot easier than rotating the head around this axis, yeah? Because of the musculature around it.
Zoran, you know how in week 1 you mentioned that a lot of the method is you move this and you compare it, is that easier? And then, but I would see a limitation with that if it was completely conscious, if there's 81 variations, or in fact infinite variations if you only move them to some degree.
Yeah.
So to what extent do you have to make that conscious choice, or to what extent is there some unconscious, even if it's awareness, that helps to say, oh yeah, no, that's nice, you know, or, you know, sometimes after a meal you think, oh, my hips are a bit further forward, that feels quite good, but they could be heaps, you know, you could choose to have them heaps forward or just a little bit. So our big question is how conscious that does the choice have to be, or does your body or your nervous system somehow help you out?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. I have an answer, and I won't flip you off. I really won't flip you off. Once again, I'm going to harken back to that talk, the very first one about sensation and objective. Of course, someone can look at you from the outside and do quantitative measures. Can you tilt your legs further? Can you not tilt your legs further? But you know, from the inside, it's a whole different experience, and you're asking an inside question. Yep. So it's only by contrast. It's only by tasting the difference, or even first of all, knowing that it's possible to discern the difference between one thing and another. Because until that moment that you make the distinction, there is no distinction. That's actually a big concept. Until the moment you make a distinction, in other words, until you discern a difference, there is no difference. It's, yeah. Oh, don't go there. I can't answer that question. Well, I can.
Because my question goes to, well, the people whose cognitive ability is limited for whatever children or
okay.
Whatever, can they benefit?
Okay, so I said I'd be direct, and I can see myself getting there, but I have to say a few things before I get there. And so this business about the distinction is in you, it's not out there. It's partially true and partially not true, because it's always a relationship. It's always a relationship between me and the world. So I need to qualify that. Now, to get to your question directly, yes, your nervous system, although I can't use the word distinction anymore, because distinction is what human beings do, not nervous systems. What nervous systems do is they get agitated. And something stimulates something somewhere else, and the agitation pattern changes. It goes from being agitated like this, being agitated like this. That pattern of agitation is what people say correlates to you're suddenly perceiving something one way and you're suddenly perceiving something the other. And that, please keep in mind, is just a story. It's an explanation. It's not necessarily true. But let's go with that explanation, just to say for a moment in time that that's actually true. So that means, does that agitation have to include your consciousness? No. I told you, yeah? But as long as you lay the ground and you understand where I'm coming from, It makes sense. Am I right? Probably not. Is there another way of explaining it? Probably yes. But can you see, if I at least lay a ground, then I can give you an answer upon which that answer stands. Yeah. So here's an example. So I can't remember where it's from, but I know I read it in some psychology text years ago. You know, some guy lost his long-term memory capacity. And, you know, way back in the 40s, you know, the psychology experiments were pretty cruel. You know, when you look at some of the experiments that Watson did with those babies coming in and frightening them, it was pretty like. But, you know, so this guy thought he'd try it out. He came in and he put a little drawing pin on his hand so that the drawing pin was sticking, drawing pin, you know, a little drawing pin, yeah? And he came in and he shook this patient's hand. And, of course, the patient took his hand and the drawing pin stuck in his palm. I told you, you know, sometimes these experiments are pretty cruel. Now, this guy didn't have what you'd call conscious memory recall. You know, you tell him something, he'd come back in the door 5 minutes later and he'd say, hello again. Oh, I haven't seen you in a long time. Oh, I was just in here 5 minutes ago. Yeah. The same doctor comes in the next day, puts out his hand, the patient goes to put out his hand, then all of a sudden he stops and he goes, so was that a conscious memory? Did he go, oh, well, shit, I remember, no, you're not getting me again? Or did some part of him recognize? In other words, there was some part of his nervous system that when he did this, it started to agitate in that pattern that was linked to this agitation. And it kicked in. And most of the time, this is the place that we operate in. It's called habit. Yeah. You know the stuff that I was talking about this week. Sometimes I talked about sailing, sometimes I talked about cooking. Our habits operate underground, or in neurological terms, subcortically, below the rind of the cortex, in this deep area of the brain and the back of the cerebellum that actually controls things. And all you have to do, and this is what I really like about Feldenkrais. Sometimes he has these turns of phrase and you go, oh, I wish I had said that first. You know, the thought does it. So here's an example. Open your jaw, close your jaw. Right. The thought just did it. Did you have to think about what muscles had to contract? Did you have to think about what the word jaw was? Did you have to think? Yeah. I'll try something else. Just let me recall just a second. My Croatian is so poor, I'm having a hard time retrieving the vocabulary. Could you all please stand up? Now, even me saying that is already a clue, but that's okay. So here it comes. You ready for it? Mm-hmm. Sedi. Sedi. You see, you by inference, I got you to stand up. Sedi. Sedi sada. Sedi sada. No, sada. Sedi. 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 Molim vas, sedi. Please, sit down. There was a time in your life that those words meant, those words, stand up, sit down, open your mouth, close your mouth. They meant nothing. They were just vibrations hitting your eardrum. And it's through your interactions with people and your deliberate practice with scaffolding. Remember, promoting, affording things. Your parents afforded you learning a language. The way they interact with you, the sounds they made, what they pointed to. Now, do you have to think about sit down, stand up? You've learnt it. So there's the answer to your question. Yeah. Absolutely. It's an old agitation that, oh, I see, did you want to say something? Oh, the orange box. So to repeat it, is that a survival thing? Yes, because we're born into this world with, and this is what, see, it kind of was. It is a learned thing. It is a learned thing, but once again, I have to establish, to answer the question, I have to establish the ground, and this is where we'll go to tomorrow. So you're actually anticipating what we'll be talking a little bit about tomorrow. It's a learned thing through the lineage of the species. That's what they call reflexes. So those patterns of, I'll call them agitation. Those patterns of, oh, actually, no, there's another one. Those patterns of, activity, that's better. There's no negativity in that. Yeah. Those patterns of activity that happen in the nervous system, some of those patterns are what you would call in computer speak or engineering speak, hardwired. You come into the world and they're hardwired. Yeah? You don't have to learn to pull your hand away. You don't have to learn if the light's bright to actually turn away from it. You're actually doing it in the womb. Yeah. So can you see that already becomes the basis for some sort of associative learning? Oh, it's absolutely mysterious. I'll show you a video tomorrow of a particular chap, and those of you who were downstairs last week, I'm sorry you've seen it, but yeah, I'll show you a very short video clip of one of the most highly funded neuroscientists in the United States who recently passed away. Hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. Center for Consciousness Studies. Gerald Edelman. You'll hear what he has to say. Okay, how are we going? Oh, last question.
I found very interesting and different taking this kind of class when someone tell me move your shoulder and the right instead get closer your shoulder to your ear. Just think about distance or to put this near the other part. Instead said, okay, flex or tell you the action you are doing. It's different. I don't know. Maybe you can gain the people do things that they don't think they can do.
Absolutely. So if I use the language of kinesiology, and I'm in structural kinesiology, and I use the words flex, extend, rotate, a lot of people go, what do you mean? But if I use, and this is the cleverness of the guy, if I use words that are in our everyday vocabulary, shoulder, head, earlobe, the distinctions, the names that we have given to different parts of our body. Yeah? We carve up our body in our language. Yeah? In some languages, they don't carve up the body in the same way. In African, this is arm, this is arm, this is arm, this is arm, this is arm. Arm. No distinction. Small arm. Yeah, so every culture, well, not every culture, but a lot of cultures carve up the body linguistically differently. Yeah, but most people, when you say, "Can you bring the right shoulder towards the ear?" they kind of get an idea of what that is. They don't have to know whether it's flexion, extension. They don't need to know that it's the trapezius or the scalenes doing it. They just do it, unless, of course, they have what you would call a different body image. Remember the other day when you were lying on the floor and I said, could you take your forehead to that space between your legs? Could you take your chin? Yeah. Head is a global term, like Earth is a global term. And then on Earth, we've got Australia and we've got Europe. So in my head, you've got the nose and you've got the ears, same thing. But some people don't have that kind of differentiated map. It's kind of a little bit different. And so you actually see the difference in their movement until you start to do variations, and then they get the idea. Oh, that's what we're doing. And you see, it sounds like that's like, oh yeah, okay, I can do that. Yeah. And that's the delicious part of it. That's the beauty of the openness of language for interpretation. And that's the beauty of being able to use language in a way that touches people and invites them into different realms. Yeah. And having said that, you're invited into a new realm by Jenny. So if there is a burning question that you have, you can always come up to me or Jenny and ask it in private. As you can see, I hate